every time we hear of an economic rebound and macros looking good, one question that everybody asks is, but where are the jobs? Now, the macroeconomic uncertainty is impacting hiring across the board. The Indian IT sector and services industry's campus placement has been deeply affected and impacted. Many institutions are complaining that these companies that you would come to campuses to hire students are visiting but not making any hiring commitment. In fact, a news report also states that hiring could be down, at least in IT sector, by as much as 40%. Not just that, job cuts also continue unabated. Nearly 70 startups laid off 17,000 employees in the first half of 2023 alone. Those are big numbers. Numbers, of course, we continue to track. But more so, what exactly is driving hiring sentiment? To talk about that is joining on the show at this point in time is joining Prabir Jha, who's a HR strategist and also an advisor in many companies. Prabir, thanks very much for taking time out. I think my first question to you would be, is this specific to IT sector or are we seeing job cuts across the board?
Hi, Shweta. Thank you for having me on your show. And I think the answer is in your question. I think it is more reflective of what's happening in the tech space. Part of it mirrored by the changes and the recessionary mood in the consumer markets, the Western world. And that is what is clearly coming out in play. Startups, there's been continued extension of the funding winter. It's getting a little more drawn. But having said that, and I was listening to some of the quarterly results that you were talking about, I personally believe the sentiment is overall going to be good. But, when technology, hiccups, the media also makes a big story out of it. So you're very right. On campuses, a lot of the big daddies from the tech space who would hire, they've dramatically cut down their offer numbers. I think in some ways, this is what I call hiring correction. The quality, the nuance of hiring is going to be a little different. But I do not think that the outlook is by any means pessimistic. I don't think that's necessarily true.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. You're saying the outlook is not pessimistic despite the fact that students who are currently in the campus, perhaps in their last year, are looking at a bleak future. How do you explain it?
It's all with reference to what they've heard and seen over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, right? And you get taken away by the euphoria of placements and day zeros and day -1, and everyone gets a job, earlier. And you've got the big tech consulting firms who come in and hire 50 people from a batch. Now, that's obviously not happening, right? And for many people who had possibly designed or thought that they would possibly build careers in this space, for them, it's a bit of a hiccup. But does it mean that there are not going to be enough job offers or other companies are not going to come to campus? I don't think that's true. I think it's an opportunity for many, many companies to up their hiring, the quality of hiring. But it's a mismatch between what students and the dreams they came with to campus and unfortunately the downturn that we see in the technology space.
All right. I think my question to you in this case would be specifically with respect to startups, since we continue to track the startup growth trajectory, or rather the degrowth that we are looking at. Less number of unicorns, less number of soonicorns. A big story that we continue to track also in terms of devaluation. Are we looking at startups not doing too well? I mean, what is your outlook if you look at the performances of startups? Because here on News9, we have tracked growth story of Byju, which is one of the most valued startup in India, as many would say, maybe not so much anymore. Dunzo, whose future is looking bleak. All these startups that, started on a very promising note, not seem to be doing too well at this point in time.
So it's a pity, and some of it is, I'll be honest, the doing of these startup management styles and practices. I mean, they themselves have to be blamed. Second is many startups, I think, grew too fast without getting their fundamental systems in place. So some of the so-called marquee unicorns that we played up and made into big daddies over the last few years, their hiccups have definitely muted the sentiment, not only about startups, but also hiring for startups. That's the first part. Second part is that a lot of investors that I speak with are getting little more prudent, little more conservative. but it's not to say they are not willing to make the investments. I advise a number of startups, and I can tell you in many of these startups, they are early stage startups, but they continue to be looking for people and good people at that. So I think, as I mentioned, to me, the seasonality is going to be more about the quality of hiring, the numbers of hiring, and the nuance of sectors. And unfortunately, because we see the big overhang, at least from a media story perspective, which has been a lot to do with startups and a lot to do with technology, there is a lot more of sentiment of gloom and doom. I mean, you just look around, there are many companies in heavy engineering, in hardcore engineering, in consumer durables who continue to be looking for people and good people. And I know for sure that the hiring or need for quality talent hiring is not abating. I continue to see those kind of reach outs to me as well. So I know that the sentiment is not as bleak. And yeah, there is a bit of a seasonality. And campus hiring, which was volume hiring by tech companies, that's without doubt something which has been, a disappointment this season.
All right, and how long do you think or believe that this disappointment is going to continue? Because here we've been talking about funding winter, Karthik, for a while, as a matter of fact. A funding winter which has lasted for more than some would say 9 months, 1 year.
Almost a year now. Yeah.
Almost a year now. A winter that does not get over.
I know, it reminds you of Game of Thrones, right? Winter
Exactly.
is coming and hey, winter is here now. Winter is
winter
not
is
going
not
anywhere.
going away.
Winter is staying. Yeah, so I think Pradeep definitely has a point, Shweta, and this is something that we've also discussed multiple times over, that that startups were, of course, in this frenzy of raising capital, which they did very successfully, and in this bid to compete within the industry that they operate in, whether you look at fintech, whether you look at health tech, you look at logistics tech, you look at all these food tech, I think these were all anything which had a suffix of tech saw enormous hiring, and that obviously swells up the P&L account. Now, in the absence of fresh funding coming and not a proven business model which is generating sustainable cash month after month, quarter after quarter, obviously the pressure on the P&L is so high that you've got to shed people. So, Prabir is calling it a correction. I would maybe go as far as say that it is not just a correction, it is pretty much a reconciliation with reality. Reality does not now need you to burn the kind of cash that you have burnt in the past. But taking, let's say, the side of the students in this case. Now, what has also happened over the last 3-4 years is that ever since, in fact, the pandemic hit, there was this entire lost cohort of 2 years. 2 years when campuses were shut, people did not get placements, they did not go to college, and these were lost years for students. Then we saw a little bit of sunshine in 2022, which again seems to be evaporating now simply because of the US funding winter, which primarily just means that there is inflation, rate hike, money has been parked in US Treasury bonds, and that money is not flowing into the Indian startup ecosystem as it used to. So for the students who have taken high education loans, who have joined institutions and picked up courses which were thought to be high paying, now find themselves in the lurch. So what is going to happen to them is that a year down the line, when this funding winter starts to thaw and the situation becomes a little easier, I've been told that some $18 billion worth of startup investments are waiting to come into India. And they will come perhaps now into companies which are making unit economic sense. They are making some sort of a runway towards profitability is visible. Now, what happens is, by the time those taps open and this 18 billion or anything in between comes into the startup ecosystem, by then there is a new cohort of graduates who have possibly taken the same courses or slightly more advanced edited courses which are more relevant for the times today. And this generation which has lost out will continue to be losing out in the larger run in their careers, and that will become something very difficult for this cohort between, let's say, 2020 to 2023, 2024 to reconcile their careers with. When people who are junior to them, students who have joined the same institutions, taken the same courses by virtue of being younger, will get picked up next year or the year after that and will end up commanding better salaries, better positions than these poor folks who will end up getting absorbed, maybe not in their dream companies, not in their dream roles, and will continue to struggle for a much longer period. So I think, Prabir, that reconciliation, I believe, is going to be a challenge for this cohort. And how do you then advise these students or help them gear up to deal with this reality?
No, very insightful, Karthik. My only additional comment or a little different perspective is, it's taking a very narrow and short-term view of careers, right? 2 years here and there. I mean, that's not going to decide who is really going to have a successful career. Yeah, the launch pad is a little different. The launch pad is a little nuanced. And but I wanted to share a perspective that how the student psyche is also impacting. Forget the demand side of it, even from the student side of it. See, there have been too many sordid stories of layoffs, and I would like to believe non-empathetic severance by many startups and maybe by many big tech companies. People are also being very wary about wanting to pitch themselves for opportunities in this space. So a bit of wait and watch is not a bad thing, because this is also about an ecosystem evolving from the demand and the supply side. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. Prabir, you briefly touched upon certain sectors and certain startups that will continue to do well, perhaps non-tech sectors, as my colleague Karthik was referring to, sectors that do not have tech as a suffix to them. Which are these sectors that you would be advising students who are perhaps enrolling into college now, looking to to join the workforce in next 3 to 4 years? Which are these sectors that you are hoping that students will pick on, and what are the startups? What kind of startups do you think are still hiring, where students should perhaps focus on?
So for me, the opportunities are going to incorporate many sectors that for example, you hear a lot of buzz about semiconductors. You hear a lot of buzz about infrastructure, right? Now, infrastructure may not have been the most glamorous sector, but the opportunities are huge. And I personally believe.
Sorry, Prabir, you can go on.
So, I believe the opportunities in infrastructure upgrade is huge. I mean, look at the kind of investments that are coming in. I personally believe the health tech and the plain healthcare space, including pharmaceuticals, that will continue to be very exciting. I think you wait for elections, and after, once there's a little bit more of clarity on the policy dispensation, I think that's a sector which is going to be definitely booming. And personally, I believe that the FMCG space will continue to be on the back of more dispersed and deeper disposable incomes, is going to see a lot of action. Even some of the so-called startups, and I was speaking to some of them recently, who are now in tier 3, tier 4 towns and cities, they are looking for people. But it's a very different nuance than the typical television conversation, business schools, IITs, IIMs. Finally, let's look at it. That's a very small percentage of people that we are really talking about, but all of us are more familiar with them, so we talk about that. But real hardcore feet on the street requirements of a range of these opportunities, are huge. I'll leave you with one thought, and it's a more strategic and directional view that I have. In India, we unfortunately have too much of a premium on higher education. Everyone wants to be in an MBA or have a postgraduate degree. If we actually, as a society, as a government, as a community, we start looking more at vocationalizing, I think the opportunities of employment, more like the German model, I think there's a huge opportunity, because with this 3 trillion to 5 trillion and a $10 trillion aspiration, we'll need a lot of rewiring in the way we define skills. And I think we will have to go down the education value chain, because you don't necessarily only need so-called super qualified MTechs and PhDs and MBAs, because that's an artificial crisis. And everyone believes that now they've got so qualified, they can't do any other job. So I think this is something that as a society, as government, as industry, we will need to crack and look at vocationalizing and go down the education value chain. Otherwise, I think this issue of just playing ping pong depending on cyclicality and seasonality is not going to be a strategic way of looking at the problem.
Okay, very, very interesting point of view. You don't need a PhD, you don't need to be in IIM, you don't need to be in IIT in order to get a job. Perhaps we need more feet on the ground. Before I let you go, I think an important question perhaps for those people or people who'd be watching us, wanting to know, fresh graduates, people like us, even seasoned professional like
Karthik. Not
graduates anymore, Shweta. It's been
a while.
Seasoned professional like Karthik would want to know how challenging has the job market become in view of AI? You know, we keep talking about AI and perhaps we'll talk about it again tomorrow, but what skills do we need to imbibe right now as an HR professional? What skills do you look at when hiring people as far as their AI skills are concerned?
So, I mean, I won't talk on the tech side, but as AI, I think there will be a disruption of many functions, many businesses. There is no doubt about it. The speed and pace of that deployment could vary a little, but I think that it was going to make a lot of routine, mundane, transactional jobs possibly disappear is a scare I won't deny. It is true. And one is already hearing of stories where many of these things will go away. But what will be more important, and I think for students to start thinking about, and particularly in our context, is about creative thinking. The ability to think different, the ability to innovate, the ability to deal with ambiguity, the ability to kind of try to reimagine, the ability to collaborate, the ability to be more empathetic. Some of these skills are going to become far more important, because as technology enables a lot of other doing, how you do will become very critical, and what you visualize will become very important. So the power of that is what one will at least be looking for, and it is not the prerogative of a qualification or a degree. It is about the person, and we just have to look for these people who are those bright sparks, the bright diamonds, who are able to kind of get to work with a set of people and get it done. I think that's really where the nuance of new definition of talent is going.
Right. Prabir, I think a lot of students would be watching you today and have learned, I'm sure, a great deal. We have learned a great deal from you. Thanks very much for joining with your inputs. We will come back to you, hopefully call you back again on a story around AI. That's the hot topic, and that is something we continue to discuss every day. Thank you for taking time out this afternoon.